Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking with Antony Sammeroff. We discuss all sorts of things that are causing problems within the economy over the last year and a half. We talk about COVID, the lockdowns, the introduction of UBI, under a different name, of course, because they wouldn't call it UBI. And we have an all-around great conversation. Antony is a good friend of mine. He hosts the Scottish Liberty podcast, and he's also written a book on UBI, for and against. So check it out if you haven't already. But first, as always, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great graphic designer. He's an okay libertarian, and he sucks as an ANCAP. But go to RyanBunting.com if you want your logo to look like mine or Pete Quinones from Free Man Beyond the Wall. Plus, he's an author. He has a book for sale at RyanBunting.com. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Okay, I am here with Mr. Antony Sammeroff, the Scottish economist. What's going on, buddy?
I'm chilling in LA. The travels continue. I've got a couple of stops before I need to leave the country, because you're only allowed to stay here for 90 days at a stretch, and then you need to leave. And you can't just say go to Costa Rica and come back the next day. That's not acceptable. You need to stay out for a while.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more stops. I'm going to be in Nashville. I'm going to be in Austin, Texas, which is a little treat for me because I was there for a couple of days with Stephen Kinsella, and I just really like the atmosphere in Austin. So I said, whenever I get the chance, I'm going to find a way to chill there for a week or so. And it took many months, but I finally got my chance.
Yeah. Austin's pretty nice. It's an interesting city. I lived outside of Austin for a while, and I enjoyed my time there. Got in a lot of trouble. I was young, going to clubs, doing stupid shit. But yeah.
Well, a lot of people are complaining that it's undergone a multi-decade leftist takeover. Okay. But I have to say the vibe's cool, and maybe just leftists create cool vibe cities. I love the vibe in Austin, but also people don't realize there's a huge libertarian community in Austin. I've been to a whole bunch of cities, and the meetup that I went to in Austin was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, turnout of libertarian-minded people for a meetup. So, and I don't think that's because I was coming. It was just a really big meetup.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that there's so many liberty-minded people in that city, and it's got a buzz. I love cities that have a buzz. They just have their own feeling. They are it feels good to be in certain cities, I find.
Yeah. Did you get to hang out with Scott any when you were up there?
I've hung out with Scott 3 times, or at least at events and things like that, but he wasn't able to go to that meetup. He did tell me that if I was ever in Austin, I should shoot him a message and we'd go out on the boat.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've mostly hung out with him at events.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, one of the reason I wanted to have you on, and I hadn't had a chance to get you on the podcast, though we've talked off the podcast, quite a few times, spent some time together at Childeberg and all that. One of the reasons I wanted to get you on is because you wrote the book on UBI, and one of the things I
I wrote
noticed,
a book on UBI.
you wrote the book, the book. It is the book on UBI. But one of the things I've noticed over the last year, and Beatrix's client one of her clients has been trying to hire people, and I've heard that unemployment is paying out more than what minimum wage is, and they've had a lot of issues with people applying several times but never reacting to their inquiry to interview. And
Yeah,
and
a
so
lot of a lot of articles have been appearing on this in the conservative press,
right,
and even my dad sent me an article that was echoing this in the UK press, as in some journalist that was keeping abreast of what was going on in American media basically did a copycat article of the stuff that's been appearing in the States, saying people don't want to get jobs, people don't want to go back to work,
right,
they enjoy being on furlough, or they're worried that they'll lose more benefit than they get. So they basically had a little bash of UBI in the United States, and it looks like the economists have been correct. Well, I say economists loosely because the classical tradition in economics predicts that if you subsidize certain behavior, you'll get more of it, and if you punish certain behavior, you'll get less of it. Of course, there's a bunch of economists that do apologetics for UBI and say that the laws of economics suspend because the human spirit, the emancipatory power of the UBI, as I've called it. Oh no, if you just pay people to stay at home, what will happen is they'll feel less pressure on themselves and they'll become more ambitious, and they'll want to start a business, or they'll follow their dreams that they were too stressed to before. But I mean, countless are the people who've said, do you know what, I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to become a novelist. I've saved up some money. And 3 to 9 months later, they end up getting a job because they find out when they're at home with all that time, they find reasons to procrastinate and not write the novel they've always wanted to write, or whatever it is. And because it kind of reminds me of when you're at college. And when I was at college, I was writing plays. And it's not fucking easy to write a play. At least I didn't find it easy.
right.
When I was in college, I would think, oh, I can't wait till the summer so that I've got lots of free time and I can really finish this. But of course, when the summer came around, I would think, oh, I can't wait till college goes back and I've got some structure in my life so that I can, because this lack of structure is killing me. There's always an excuse not to follow your dreams. And people who do it because they can't not do it, because they have to do it. And giving them a UBI is, in 9 out of 10 cases, not going to suddenly put a fire under their ass to do those things they always wanted to do, because if they wanted to do them badly enough, they would be doing them already. They need to go and see a psychologist. They don't need if they're having trouble motivating themselves, they don't need to be kept like a domesticated animal at everyone else's expense, I should add.
Yeah, because people are like, basically what you're saying is people react to incentives, and they. Oh, Boogie. Sorry, my dog just ran into my cigarette. Yeah, people react to incentives, and the more perverse the incentives, as in a UBI, and getting these extended benefits for, you know, the last year and a half, it is caused a lot of people to just sit around and do nothing. Whereas somebody like me, I'm looking around and going, oh shit, you know, shit's hitting the fan. This is what I've been reading about. I need to start doing something. But I was already in the process of doing something. So it was just a matter of me basically, for lack of a better term, putting the pedal to the metal and not, you know, changing my habits. It was just making my habits more habitual.
Mm. Well, there's no doubt that some people will have used the lockdown to develop themselves.
Yeah.
I guess those kinds of people will use any situation in their life to develop themselves. You know, if you're a good student, you learn from everything, basically.
Right. Some people, well, I would say like the vast majority of people aren't ambitious though. They're just doing, they're just doing what it takes to get by. Right. And so there are always going to be those ambitious people that maybe haven't had the opportunity, or, you know, have fallen on hard times or whatever, that are always looking for an opportunity to present itself and will take advantage of a situation like the lockdowns. But there is probably a vast majority of people, I'd say, that are just interested in squeaking by and not interested in pursuing any better avenue. And I think that's what we've seen with the amount of money that the government has been pumping out to people.
Well, I mean, the chickens haven't come home to roost either. The thing is about printing money is obviously you get benefits in the here and now, but people don't know what the consequences of all this is going to be. I mean, I don't watch the news, so I don't know what people are consuming really, but I imagine they're not saying on the news, well, what are going to be the consequences of all this money that has been printed during the lockdowns? Like, I'm guessing that there's not going to be, that you're not going to find a reasoned discussion of that on NBC,
Right.
MSNBC,
Yeah. Yeah.
or CNN, you
Right.
know?
One of the most interesting points that you made in your book, UBI For and Against, was when you were talking about the price of housing, and you're really, you cover how that the government is incentivized to subsidize the housing market in order to keep the price of housing rising. And it's one of the only markets in the world that is on the, like, perpetually rises, never drops. And it's because homeowners want the value of their property to go up. And I just got an appraisal done on my house, and sent over the last 6 years, it has gone up from valued at 177,000 to over 259,000.
Wow.
Yeah, just in the last 6 years. And
Not a bad investment.
right,
But
exactly.
here's the thing, it's basically public choice theory. At any time, there's more people who own a house than there are people who are looking for a house. So if house prices fall, that's going to be a lot of pissed off voters. So even though it would benefit everyone if house prices fell drastically in the long term, well, I mean, obviously, if you own 1,000 properties, it's not going to benefit you. But even though it would benefit almost everyone, even if you've got a mortgage, because the thing is, you're going to be able to essentially get a better value property for the same amount of money you're paying, or get or pay a lot less for a property of the same size. So it's going to benefit most people in the long term. in the short term, it's never in the interest of the government to allow this to happen, which is why they always do everything they can. You know, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and you know what
I
I'm
know what
talking
you're
about.
saying. Yeah, yeah, we're we're
You
on
know,
the same page.
printing money, indeed, regulating zoning laws, um, delegating certain lands, saying that it can't be used for environmental reasons, even though in many cases those protected lands are actually of very low quality in terms of ecosystems. These are all strict regulations on how many people can stay in an apartment. Because if more people could stay to an apartment, then obviously you need fewer apartments. There's so many regulations. I think Ryan McMacken at Mises.org has written quite a lot of articles about how the government drives the price of housing in the US through the roof. And I do talk about that in my book because it's one of my ways of saying, well, look, if you just got the government the hell out of the way, the cost of living would be so much lower than it is now that you wouldn't need a UBI because people would be so rich. I mean, just think America pays twice as much per head on healthcare every year as most other industrialized countries. And yeah, if you can afford it, you can get better healthcare in the US than most places. However, the price of healthcare has been driven through the roof by the American government in so many ways that we could outline. I think the average person in this country does not realize how impoverished they are by government, essentially. And that's why they think you need a UBI, because they don't realize how rich everyone would be on a free market.
Yeah, well, in this it ties into one of my favorite books that I've ever read on economics, Markets Not Capitalism. And it, one of the things I look at is whenever like the socialist types or the communist types like say like, oh, rent is theft, or whatever, property is theft. I'm looking at what they're saying, and they're saying that these prices are artificially high. They stop at the surface level. They don't dig in deep into what it would take or what it would be under a truly market situation.
Exactly.
And so like it, as you were saying, like there are these incentives for the government to keep the prices of land high, and there's this public pressure for them to keep the prices of land high. But and if property were acting as everything else within the market acts, then the prices would be dropping, and it would not be good for the landlords. It would not be as good for the landlords. It would not be as profitable to be a landlord, right? So they're identifying an issue, but
Well,
they're not getting deep enough into the subject to understand that the issue is created by what they're advocating, by the regulations and by the intervention of the government is what is actually driving the prices up and making it so much more difficult for young people to own homes nowadays as opposed to in the past.
absolutely. And on a free market, a landlord provides a service. He takes the responsibility over replacing fittings, and if anything happens to the place, it's on him.
Mm.
You know, people don't treat things that they don't own as well as they treat things that they do own. So, the kind of repairs and things like that, it'd probably be cheaper to rent a place than to get a mortgage. So they're some people don't want to own their own home because they want the flexibility of being able to leave. There's lots of things that the landlord does. Now, it might be under this current system that they are getting inflated profits and rents, but essentially that's measured against every other investment that they could have made, because you don't need to buy an extra apartment. You could go into the stock market instead. you could sell bonds, or you could just buy a yacht or whatever.
Mhm.
You could buy luxury items. You don't have to invest money in property.
Mm.
Now, because we've had such a corrupt system, it's been beneficial to people who already have capital to invest in property because the price of property has gone through the roof. But that wouldn't necessarily be the case. I mean, in any market where you see prices stay high and fail to come down, you can pretty much bet that the government's involved, because it's like, it's a simple principle. If there's high profits, that attracts more service provision in order to take care of the profits. So if it's so profitable to rent, then the regular free market thing would be to build more apartments to take advantage of the high rents. But obviously that's being disallowed. So in many places, they've got regulations about how high you're allowed to build, even though, you know, large buildings are more energy efficient and we're meant to be green these days. There's a whole host of hypocrisies and things like that.
Yeah, and well, I just changed jobs, and now I'm working for a lumber company, and still driving a truck. I'm delivering the materials to the job sites, and the company I'm working for has a 7-year contract with the Texas government, building GLOs, and it's the governmental land office, and basically what they're doing is they're going in, and I mean you're talking 2-3 years out, and in some cases 5 years out from hurricanes that have hit and flooded these homes and destroyed these homes, and they're tearing down these homes and rebuilding these homes for the the people that live in these homes. And so you're looking at a situation where the taxpayer is on the line for building homes or rebuilding homes for people that are living in a floodplain. And the way the insurance is set up down here, it's not set up here in Hurricane Alley for the government or for the insurance company to cover the entire expense. FEMA has kind of pushed the private insurance agencies out of the market in many cases and taken over those expenses that would normally be left to insurance companies. So you have governments going in, tearing down a home that's probably worth $20,000-$30,000 at best, and building $200,000-$300,000 homes in its place, because they're putting it on, they're building these homes above ground on pillars 5 foot off the ground so that they won't experience flood damage next time. So they're looking at it and saying, okay, we don't want to have to turn around and rebuild these homes again in 5 years when another hurricane, savages this region. But at the same time, you have to wonder, why is the taxpayer, the people, the other people who have had their homes devastated, that can't afford to have their homes rebuilt but make too much money for the government to come in and rebuild them, on the line to rebuild these homes that should have never been their responsibility in the first place.
Right. And when you have a democracy, you have a system that's inherently built for people to take the consequences of their negative, or let's say the negative consequences of their actions, and export them to the body politic. It's like, if I'm able to get the taxpayer to underwrite my insurance, then why am I going to try and do that? And it's like the Bastiat quote, the government is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. Mm-hmm. So you've got a situation where people are incentivized to loot each other. Same with the healthcare system when it comes to, people trying to stop insurance companies from price discriminating against people by age, even though older people on average have more wealth than younger people, or stop people discriminating in their premiums by people's lifestyle choices. I mean, if there's so much argument and debate on the science of what is healthy to eat and what kind of exercise is damaging to your joints and in the long term, and how many people have back pain. And the thing is, if you had a proper insurance system, that the incentives to get clear scientific information on all of this health related stuff would be so huge, because the that's how the insurance companies would be preventing themselves from having to do big payouts, by being able to discriminate against people who had unhealthy habits and charge them more. But so we've lost out on decades of clear research on how to live a good life. And if people don't want to follow the research, then they can, but it just means that they're going to have to pay a little bit more for healthcare, or a lot more if they adopt a lot of unhealthy habits. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. You know, the sad thing is not that. The sad thing is just having missed out on this. Like, even it's like, if people don't want to make it unhealthy choices, that's fine. That's not the sad thing. It's the sad thing that people who really do want to make unhealthy choices hear that cholesterol's bad for you one day, good for you the next day, and then bad for you again on the third, and they don't know who to trust or who to believe. They can't get clear information. Same, even with the drug war. If drugs hadn't been made illegal, then all the research that would have been done in drugs, not just for therapeutic value as they're now doing with psilocybin, and they were before, they were made illegal with MDMA for trauma therapy, for couples counseling, all sorts of things. Not just that, but I mean, these people would be trying to engineer the drugs to have fewer side effects, to make them less dangerous, and to, we lost all the decades of research on how to make the drugs safer and better for people, because of the small-mindedness of thinking, well, we don't like something, so we can legislate against it and make it go away. We don't think it's fair that, that someone somewhere might slip through the cracks and not get healthcare, even though if we allow that risk, the price of healthcare will go down through the floor, and it will be easier to provide for people. It's a little bit sad when because it's the seen and the unseen. People can't actually see what the society would look like if not for decades of the state pouring treacle into the gears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and this goes back to the money printing. I don't even know. I completely lost track of how much money they created over the last year and a half. I think I quit paying attention at 6 trillion. I was like, they're just not going to fucking stop,
Well, yeah, it's almost like they want to crash the global economy. I mean, they're not that stupid. They know that money printing creates price inflation. So I'm a little bit mystified as to what's going on.
I think they're moving into a direction, and there's a website up. I don't know if you've ever looked at it. It's called the Digital Dollar Project .org, I think is where you can find it, and they're actually talking about creating basically a federal cryptocurrency. And so what I think they're doing is, I think they're preparing the world to move completely paperless, because if you move paperless, then you can track all currency exchanges. You can track all purchases, right? And so as you're able to move into a paperless direction, then there's the digital record kept on file for you. And we've seen like the emergence through the SEC of ESG scores, which I don't know if you've looked into the ESG at all. Have you looked into that?
No, enlighten me.
Okay, so what happened was that everybody's talking about this great reset stuff that the World Economic Forum is trying to push forward into the global economy. And what the U.S. government did was they said, okay, well, we'll take a little piece of this. We're going to take part of it, and we're going to implement this in via the SEC, and we're going to create a task force that's in charge of monitoring the environmental, social justice, and governmental effects of people's investments and purchases. Okay.
Okay.
Now that what they're doing is they're selling it as, well, we're just monitoring corporations and investors. But any investor, anybody with a 401k is an investor, right? And so I look at it and I'm going, okay, so when you have like Merrill Edge putting it on their 401k dashboard for all the members of their 401k group, saying, here is your ESG score. And what they're doing is they're ranking your investments, and it's kind of like a social credit score kind of thing, where they're ranking your investments and they're scoring you based upon where you're putting your money. And this is put into place so they can decide on whether or not you're capable of getting loans or any or banking in the future. So what they're doing is, so they're taking this idea of the social credit score that China has implemented it and implementing it into the financial market in order to choke you off from making poor investments or poor financial decisions. And so instead of them regulating or prohibiting, as they have with drugs since the 60s, what they're going to choke you off via banking and make you change your decisions based upon your availability to money.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's amazing that the tools that they have for, I mean, technology is such a double-edged sword in terms of railroading people into whatever options they decide are where they kind of want people to go. I guess what's more worrisome is the levels of compliance of people. Like when you look at the lockdowns and things, and how little people seem to value their freedom.
Yeah.
To how few of us there are, that go, this is a crock.
Yeah, well, it's something that I've tried to really verbalize, and it's really hard to really dig down deep into the economics of what's happening with the amount of money printing and make it sellable to an average person, which is what I try to do with my podcast. Is I try to make it accessible to normies, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a pejorative. It's just there are a lot of people that just, I mean, I work for a living. You know what I'm saying? And it's hard for me to keep up enough to even direct this podcast. So there are a lot of people who have kids in their homes. I don't have any kids in my house. All my kids are grown. So it's hard for a lot of people that are parenting and moving along. Thank you. To keep up with these types of things, and then these subjects are so complex And there's so many different tiers and levels to them that it's really difficult to make it accessible for people to understand what is happening around them.
Well, people need to first want to understand. I mean, libertarians mostly have this kind of mind where they just love details and nuance, and they love to have a full understanding of things. And it's hard to put yourself in the mindset of people who are just more go along to get along. And like, but the thing is, there are quite a lot of people who are political and either on the Democrat or Republican side that consider themselves to be interested in nuance and things. What I'm finding confusing is when confronted with the evidence of Florida or Texas, let's say, an an inability or unwillingness to go, oh well, I guess lockdowns aren't that effective, even though the evidence is overwhelming. Like, I just spoke to a friend of mine a couple of days ago in LA. She came back to the USA after living it for years in Chile. She was she's a US citizen as far as I know. Yeah, because she grew up here. So I don't think she's renounced her citizenship. The lockdown was so bad in Chile that you needed a permit to leave the house, and you needed to show your permit at the grocery store to get in. And for years, they've been telling us if you don't like it, you can just leave. It was hard for her to leave Chile, despite the fact that she's a US citizen. They made it hard for her to leave. I think she needed to apply for like 4 permits, and one of them was rejected. So she needed to find another way around. They made it difficult for her to even leave the country. So not only did you need a permit to go into a shop, but you weren't allowed to vote with your feet and go, well, fuck this, I'm going to somewhere freer. They put roadblocks in the way for leaving. People who are pro lockdown, like in the UK, they're opening up, and there's actually journalists writing articles saying Boris Johnson is so responsible for opening up and loosening restrictions, right? These people don't realize, I mean, to them, Stalin and Hitler only happened to other people. They couldn't possibly happen to them. Chile is not that far away from the United States. You know, Australia went that way, and that's a Western country where people speak English. Like, and here's the weird thing. Here's the apps. Well, there's a couple of weird things, but to me, this is absolutely insane. A few months before the coronavirus, in Chile, they raised the price of taking the underground, the public transport. And there was protests. Students were even rioting. In some cases, they set subway stations on fire. So they're willing to riot over an increase in public transport costs, but they're not willing to protest or make their voice known about being told they can't leave the house without a permit. It's insane. Like, that's they value their freedom less than an increase. Like, that's what makes this is mystifying to me. Now, to top it all off, Chile had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, and they're one of the most vaccinated countries. They had a big vaccine campaign, and guess what happened afterwards? There was a surge in cases and deaths. So obviously their stringent lockdown policy hasn't worked, right? Even if you don't believe that the vaccine caused this surge in cases, it doesn't really matter whether you do or not. The point is, their strict lockdown policy didn't work, but people don't go, oh shit, obviously that was the wrong policy because we tried it out and it hasn't worked. We've had a surge in cases, even though we're one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. You know, I don't know when the penny drops for people. It's like they prefer to believe that lockdowns work it's more of a preference than an opinion.
Yeah.
So how can you talk someone out of a preference? France very much had a very strict lockdown with permits to leave the house as well. Much the same as Chile, in the sense that the French people have been known to go out and protest because their labor rights are not respected, to protest because the minimum wage is too low, or
Taxes are too high.
the tax on gas is too high, or
Mm-hmm.
and what the French,
Yeah, they
accept this.
well, you know what you're
I'm so
doing.
disappointed in Scotland.
Well, you're saying these things, and I'm starting. It struck a nerve with me because so many Americans think that the world revolves around America, right? And
Right.
and there's this idea that what's happening in America is the most important thing that's happening. But these lockdowns were worldwide. Like this was a
Yeah.
global lockdown. This was insanity. People talk about the new world order or global governance. We just saw it happen, right? Like I mean
Right.
this is not a conspiracy. Like we just witnessed this. And and then there's all this talk about the virus being created in a lab in Wuhan, financed by Dr. Fauci and the NIH, and them being involved in creating this virus, through gain of function research. And I'm sitting here thinking, saying, were things so outrageous all around the world? Because what was it? We were looking at like 3 or 4 solid years of protests in different countries around the world. I mean, France, Hong Kong, there were all these things going on all around the world. Maybe this virus
And yet,
wasn't an attack on the United States. Maybe it was released intentionally, as some people suspect, but maybe it wasn't an attack on the United States. Maybe it was an attack on people demanding freedom.
well, the thing is, we've seen that there's precious few of those when it comes to lockdowns. Like, I don't know if the virus was artificially created in the lab. I don't know if the virus was released on purpose. I wouldn't, nothing would fucking surprise me.
Right.
If, if
That's
it turned
that's
out
the
that
sad thing. That's the sad thing is these people, we believe, whether or not it's true, it is very easy to believe that these people are capable of doing that.
Right, that's a good point. That's a good point. So the fact is, it doesn't really matter whether the virus was artificially engineered in a lab. Like, it doesn't even matter if 9/11 was an inside job or not. They still used it to herald in the war on terror and
Right.
blah blah blah. But the thing is, you wouldn't be surprised if, right, supposing we say 9/11 wasn't an inside job, you wouldn't necessarily object that. But if they could have pulled it off, they would have. Like,
Yes.
we're at the point where we think, the thing is, the facts on as the point is, the facts on these things don't matter. The fact is, they're willing to subject people to tyranny at the first opportunity. And not only that, but people accept it. Like, I've spent over 6 months in India in the last 4 years, and India is a country where people were moving out of poverty at an unprecedented rate, but so many people there rely on tourism and live hand to mouth. So when they say there's no tourists allowed in India, and back at the beginning of this year, I still wanted to go to India for a month in the winter. I was checking every month to say, well, maybe they'll be open next month. Well, maybe they'll be open next month. Guess what? We're at July and they've still not opened to tourists. The people in the government in India can't be stupid. They must know that some people, if they don't work, they don't eat. And they depend on people coming in to spend money. So either they just don't care that some people are going to starve to death, or they think there's maybe a few too many million poor people in India, and it might not be too bad a thing if they starve to death. I personally have a friend who lives in New Delhi who had a business called Delhi Bicycle, where he'd take people on bike tours of Delhi. They killed his business, and the reason why I mention is it's just like one example of, but people understand a story. That's why I tell the story of my friend in Chile, because it makes it concrete. When you say millions of people will have lost their business, and like no one relates to that. I, early on in the lockdowns, a couple of months, sent a text to someone in the north of India, in a more rural area, asking how things were going. He was like, it's terrible. There's children on the street asking for money for food, or asking for food. And I can't even give them anything because I don't have anything left. I don't have anything left because I don't have anything left myself. He was working, I met him because he was working in a hostel. Well, without any tourists, there was no one to go and stay in the rooms in the hostel. Mm-hmm. So them and all of the other accommodation in the area, and with it, all the jobs shut down. Like, I don't know how these people survive. It's one thing in America or the UK, which are affluent countries that have some reserves, that have wealth to rely on.
Yeah.
But in poor countries, it's absolutely devastating. And what I just keep coming back to is, how do these people allow this? How do they even allow their own government to do it? I think it was in where was it? It'll come back to me. Malawi, I think it was. The people there just protested against the lockdowns.
Yes.
And
they were like, no, everything we make in a day is what feeds us for that day. We have to work every day. Yes, I remember that. I was like that. Yeah, I was actually going to bring it up, but I was just going to call it an African country because I couldn't remember which one it was. But you're right. Malawi, it was Malawi. Yes.
So why weren't there a million Malawis? That's what. Well, I mean, there aren't a million countries in the world, but I can't believe that they're the only country where people stood up and said, no, we live from hand to mouth, and we're not going to let you starve us to death.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend in Scotland who, he reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's read Animal Farm by George Orwell, but the horse is called Boxer, and he works his ass off, and then at the end he's sent to the glue factory. That's how I see my friend. Like, I've known him for so long. He works so hard. He creates businesses. He helps a lot with the Libertarian Party in Scotland, the Scottish Libertarian Party. And he had businesses that were absolutely destroyed by the government lockdowns, to the point where he told me, sometimes he was suicidal. This guy's got kids. Everything he's worked for has been destroyed. At the beginning, they, I think, gave him one handout, then decided that his industry wasn't, essential enough to give handouts, except for, of course, to a few businesses which were, closer to the government.
Right.
He says that ordinary people just don't understand the complexity of the regulations and think that businesses should just apply for funding, or just close the business and open it up, or claim furlough. They said, a hairdresser said to him online, why don't you just get a job? He's poured his life. Like, we need to tell stories to people because they don't fucking get it otherwise. Yeah. Like, that real people's lives are being destroyed. You can say to them, because of the coronavirus, tens of thousands of people are going to miss cancer screenings, and their heart disease is going to advance towards the fact where they're terminal and can't even get a fucking operation. And for some reason, there's no idea of cost benefit analysis in the heads of pro lockdown people. And I'm waiting for people to tell me their stories of actually getting through to people who are pro lockdown and changing their minds. Because it seems to me to be some kind of religion that is immune to reason and evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it doesn't only go with the lockdown. I mean, it comes with this vaccine too. I mean, there are a lot of people I personally know people that have died for like the day after getting the vaccine. You
Right.
know,
And people just think, oh, it's just a tiny number. Oh, that's just a tiny. I know at least a few people who say that. Oh, it must just be a tiny percentage of people. Well, how do we know that
right.
when they won't let us discuss it openly without taking our
Yeah.
posts down from Facebook or YouTube? Where do you get reliable figures? I have a friend who had allergy to latex, and she was vaccinated with a vaccine that had latex in it. It took
Yeah.
her 10 years to recover. She had to have an extremely limited diet,
Yeah.
and pretty much eat nothing but a few certain foods for 10 years.
Mm.
It was like, and then as a consequence of that, what was a mild latex allergy became extremely severe, and she could die if she came into contact with latex after that vaccination. So that proves that vaccinations can cause allergies. And what have we seen since 1986 when Reagan passed the law that said that vaccine manufacturers were immune to being sued? Well, first you had an upsurge in the number of vaccines on the vaccine schedule. So by 1989, we had the arrival of all these diseases that were very rare before, like colitis, irritable bowel syndrome. There's a whole list of diseases that were very rare before 1989 that sort of became common. And guess what else? All these allergies. It didn't used to be that every second person was celiac and couldn't have gluten. It didn't used to be that everyone was fucking lactose intolerant, and every fourth, fifth person was allergic to peanuts. Like,
Yep.
the thing is, there's a legume oil or something like that in a bunch of the vaccinations, and some people, like my friend Irene, who got who was injected with latex and had a vaccine injury, she says in the same way that the vaccine made her extremely allergic to latex instead of just a little bit allergic to latex. She believes, she's a doctor, by the way, she's an MD. She believes that the vaccines are causing these, because the legume oils in it, it's causing all these peanut allergies and other allergies. Now, I can't prove that or anything like that, but should it be forbidden to say it? Can the National Institute of Health not just run a big, large-scale study comparing vaccinated populations to unvaccinated populations? They refuse to do the study. Is that anti-science? Is it anti-science to say I'm skeptical about vaccines because they won't do the study comparing the long-term health outcomes of non-vaccination to populations to vaccinate? I would say it's pro-science to say they should do the fucking study.
Right.
But they'll never do the study because the NIH, the FDA, and the CDC all own patents in vaccines, and they all gain revenue from vaccines. And all three organizations, most of their funding comes from pharma, and most of the pharma companies that fund them also have patents in vaccines. Now, we usually call that a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I get very frustrated when people just shut off when this topic comes up and say, oh, you must be a lunatic or you're anti-science. Every time I get called anti-science, it's for asking for more science. I'm saying they should do the study of the long-term health outcomes. I'm saying that vaccines should be tested against a placebo, which they're not. Most medications are tested against a placebo, but vaccines aren't. That would be pro-science. I'm asking for more science. And fundamentally, I think they should safety test the entire vaccine schedule, because what they're doing right now is they're safety testing all of the vaccines individually. But see, what if a little bit of aluminium from one vaccine is harmless, but then when you add a second one and a third one and a fourth, and you get 16 shots that all have a tiny bit of aluminium in them, that it's a cumulative effect. They refuse to safety test the whole vaccine schedule, but I'm the one that's anti-science for saying they should do the science. You know, it's one of these issues like Israel Palestine or something like that, where people just go fucking ballistic if they just, their ability to reason just, or abortion, or like, so I don't mean ability to reason, but I mean ability to have a civilized conversation.
Right.
There's
It
a few
becomes
third rail
emotional.
topics. Yeah, vaccines are like one of these third rail topics where you can't
Right.
even fucking talk about them.
Well, I've often wondered, like, because corporations are so global nowadays, like corporations don't operate just in one country, and most of the CEOs of corporations have no allegiance to any particular country. You kick them out of one country, they just move to another country. They're not restrained by borders because of the amount of money they have and the amount of money they've ever. But I've often wondered who has the most influence. And you've traveled the world much more than I have. You've looked at the world economy much closer than I have. So maybe you kind of have an idea of this. Is it like the Federal Reserve that is in bed with these corporations, or is it the IMF that is in bed with these corporations that is actually creating this kind of third rail kind of ideal?
You know, I can't say that I know. I've not really been following the IMF. I think what you have is groups that have common interests
Mm-hmm.
forging alliances to serve their common interests, and these government organizations, they're not real, like the World Health Organization, for example. People like to think that they're outside of the market and they can be arbiters and give impartial advice and be fair. But they don't understand that every entity that exists is subject to incentives, economic and otherwise, regardless of whether it's a private corporation or an NGO. There's no such thing as an impartial referee. In fact, there are no referees, there are only players. And people, how can the CDC and the NIH and the FDA be a regulator when their funding comes from exactly the agencies that they're meant to be regulating?
Yeah.
How can the journals, the medical journals, the editors of the Lancet and the British medical journals left in disgust because they said 70% of their articles were just propaganda for pharma. And a bunch of other editors of journals have said, well, we can't really guarantee to doctors that our coverage is impartial. They need to look at the science themselves. And it's like, well, wait a minute. The whole point of you being there is that you do the science so that the doctor can trust your conclusions. Otherwise, the whole point is you're meant to be providing people a shortcut so that they don't have to to look at all the science, so that you can summarize it for them. The funding, their advertising for the journals comes from pharma. Then when you look at the television in the evening, 18 out of 22 ads are from pharma. People think they're trying to advertise them drugs. They are not. That is not the purpose of them advertising on TV. They're buying favorable coverage. So the news media cannot expose pharmaceutical scandals or vaccine injuries because 18 out of the 22 ads are paid for pharma, and if they cover a scandal, they risk alienating those advertisers and losing all their advertising money. So America and New Zealand are pretty much the only countries where it's legal to advertise medication directly to the public. I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that the effects of it under the current system are that people are not going to get access to good information on the effects of pharmaceuticals or vaccines from mainstream media because they're basically bought off. So this is so complicated that people don't actually know. You know, people think, you know, the medical industry is still something that people look up to. They look up to the fact that you study for 7 years and do a residency to become a surgeon or a doctor, and that these people work so hard, and that's fair. But with it, they just think, how could, you know, the whole industry can't be lying. These good people can't be lying. They just don't understand how many levels the biasing of the information that they're receiving takes place on. They don't understand the incentive structure of the system. And as you can tell by the fact that I've been ranting about it for 20 minutes, it's not something you can explain to someone in short. Because they're going to, so the media is lying, and the NIH is lying, and the FDA and the CDC and the medical journals and the medical schools and all the doctors, and it would seem far-fetched if you don't actually understand the process by which all of these organizations have been co-opted and are essentially, to a large degree, a spokespiece for pharma. Because all the money comes from pharma.
Yeah, well, these pharmaceutical companies, like I said, these are global corporations. These corporations, they may be owned by American citizens, but they're global. They don't just operate in America. They operate all over. And so you have these companies like Pfizer that are, you know, in bed with the World Economic Forum. They're in bed with Jeff Bezos. They're in bed with
they've been involved in so much fraud and scandal over the years. There's actually a website that's called Pfizer Rap Sheet or something like that, that goes through a list of all the scandals, that all the times they've been sued, all the times they've falsified research, and blah blah blah. And also bear in mind, these companies get huge sums of money from the government. The government does massively inflate the research costs for drugs, but that in a way helps the big pharmaceutical corporations, because small companies can't actually afford the research costs, so they're actually reducing the number of actors in the market. Now, if you can get a vaccine mandated, that is billions of dollars a year potentially you're going to get from the government, who's going to pay for that. And on top of that, you have all the Medicare and Medicaid. In the UK, obviously, we have socialised healthcare. In lots of countries, they have socialised healthcare where the government pays for these medications. So it's not like these companies are just free market entities. They're getting huge sums of money from the taxpayer.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Yeah, well, and
they're using that money to co-op the national, the regulators.
That's kind of where that was kind of the direction I was going, was these companies, they receive so many subsidies. I mean you can look at any of them, from big pharma to big tech, and Google and Facebook or Pfizer or Moderna. Moderna is like 50% owned by the NIH. And so you can look at this and you can be like, these aren't private companies. They're not acting in the manner in which the market would demand that they act. They're not acting in the best interest of their customers, because the way that the market would work, the way that a free market would work is, let's say I am producing a product. Let's just say eggs, because I have my chickens laying eggs, and so I would have to make sure that my chickens were on a good diet, producing good eggs that people demanded, in order to compete in a market of eggs. And they don't. They get these regulations that cut off competition, and they get these subsidies, and they've monopolized the industry in such a way, that cartelized the industry, if you want to use Rothbardian terms, and in such a way. And I don't look at these companies, these corporations, as private entities. And this is one of the big fights that are going on right now. It's like, no, dude, these aren't private companies, bro. Like, they're government contractors at best. They're government subsidized,
right?
Bureaucrats
think about
at
it this
worst.
way. To use your analogy, right? See if the government came along and they said, we're going to buy your egg. People need eggs because they're not getting enough high quality protein. So we're going to come in and we're going to buy your eggs and we're going to distribute them to other populations. Suddenly you've got no incentive whatsoever to buy the best feed for the chickens. You're just going to buy the cheapest shit that you can find, because every penny you save is a penny earned, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could produce the lowest quality eggs because the government is just guaranteed to buy it. And a similar thing is happening when the government buys all of these drugs for people. Like, the incentive to create a great product with the fewest number of side effects, or the best product in the market, is at least somewhat reduced by that. And sometimes generics will do a good job, and also the incentive to reduce the cost of production is also reduced when the government's buying it. And so they're detached from the incentives of the marketplace. They're also detached from the incentives of the marketplace when it comes to vaccinations, let's say, because they cannot be sued for injuries, for any conditions that are put on the insert. So if you look at the insert of vaccinations, it says may cause this, may cause that, may cause this, may cause that, even including autism. They say may cause autism. Why? Just because, just in case, if they put it on the insert, then it might cause something, then they can't be sued for it causing that thing. So this has also detached them from the incentives of the marketplace, where, let's say, Milton Friedman was asked by someone that a company released a car knowing that it had a defect, and one in such and such many tens of thousands of people would die because of it. And and they did a cost benefit analysis and said, how much will we get sued? And and they decided not to recall the car.
Right.
And someone said to Milton Friedman, well, what about this? Isn't this just showing how greedy capitalists are? And Milton Friedman was like, well, is there an infinite value in a human life? Like, what if, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I'm sort of doing my own version of it. So let's supposing it was just 1 in a million people who died. Should they recall all those cars at great expense and replace them? There comes to a point where it's not really worth it to do it, because the cost of recalling the car outweighs the cost of a human life. Because if you spent exactly that amount of money in buying, Milton Friedman didn't say this obviously, but I'm saying that, let's suppose instead of recalling the car, we spend the money that it would cost to recall the car buying mosquito nets in Africa, and we'll save so many people from dying of malaria. There'll be like 100,000 times as much benefit for the same amount of money, and that's fine. Okay, all medications have side effects, and occasionally people are going to be injured by them. That's why you're allowed to sue the company, so the company can do a best cost benefit analysis and decide whether the number of vaccine injuries outweighs the benefits of the vaccines or not. And when you can't sue the company for causing injury, there's no way to determine. And I can bet you that there's far more vaccine injuries than people realize, and that the market would sustain. And I know that because otherwise they wouldn't have gone to the government to get immunity from prosecution for injury.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't need immunity if your product is, top of the line. Yeah, I mean, that's just
Right, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should be making them safer.
Yeah.
Maybe they shouldn't be putting detergent and aluminium compounds and, cells from aborted fetuses and all the fucking fucked up shit that goes in some of the vaccines. Maybe they should be finding a safer way to do it. Maybe they shouldn't be injecting into the blood. Maybe they should find nasal sprays for vaccines. People have pioneered research into that, because the body is very particular about what it lets into the blood.
Right.
And if you take something harmful in through your mouth, you can puke, you can get the shits, you can cough, you can sneeze. The blood can't puke. So when you're putting like small quantities of, it's like if you drink a cup of Drano, you'll probably puke up and you won't die. But if you inject a tiny bit of Drano into your vein, then it will kill you. Because what is a small amount of a toxic compound to ingest through your mouth is not a small amount of a toxic compound to inject directly into your veins.
Right.
So, but of course, if you suggest this, you're anti-science. So, I'd like to write an article on this, because I wouldn't have if there's one fucking issue you don't want to be on, you don't want to be, it's like, who actually wants to be critical of vaccines? Like, the amount of hate and flaming that you'll get for that is like through the roof. But the more I read, the more reasonable claims I found. I'm just saying, I'm just asking for more science. That's the crazy thing, because they always say that you're being anti-science, but actually, I'm just asking for more science, right? That's what I want. I want them to treat vaccines like other drugs. I want them to test them against a placebo, and I want them to safety test the whole vaccine schedule, and I want them to do a long-term study of outcomes of vaccinated versus non-vaccinated populations, right? So I would say those are all reasonable things to want data on, since we're basically vaccinating kids with more shots than ever, and the government's paying for it, and the companies are immune to prosecution, and all the regulators own patents and vaccines, right? Since those are the circumstances we're laboring under, I think, running the fucking studies might be a good idea, so we've got clear data, since we're doing this huge experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you were absolutely right there. And I would love to read that article if you ever do write it. I hope it's published at the
Well, it'll be
Libertarian
easier to do
Institute.
it now because it'll be. Do you think I should submit it to the Libertarian Institute? Okay, maybe I'll do
Yes.
that. Well, it'll be easier to do it now because I've talked about it on your podcast, so I can go back and listen to it and summarize all my points.
Yep.
I think I might. I was trying to think about like a title for it, like something, something about anti-science. But I think I've got the title now. Like the title would be "I'm just asking for more science."
Yes. Yeah. That would be a good one. But we've been going over an hour, man. And I don't
Cool.
want to keep you too long. I have 2 more interviews to do today, so I can't wear
Well
myself out
done.
listening to Antony all day.
Well, I hope that we covered all the topics that you wanted to cover, and I'm happy with it.
It went in a
'Cause I've
different
covered some
direction
stuff
than I
that I
thought it
didn't
was
do.
going to, but I'm happy with it. I'm very happy.
Okay, cool.
All right, brother.
Well, thanks very much for having me on the show. I enjoyed it, and it's great to connect with you, bro.
Well, man.
I'll syndicate it
plug.
out. I'll syndicate it out to Scottish Liberty Podcast in a couple of weeks as well.
Cool. Plug away real quick.
Okay, well, I'm responsible for the Scottish Liberty Podcast, which you'll find on iTunes, and also Be Yourself and Love It podcast, which is more personal development orientated. You can also find a bunch of my articles on Mises.org, and you can find, if you want to speak to me, usually the best way is to message me on Facebook, although I started using Twitter as well, so you can message me on Twitter.
Yep. All right. Well,
I'm easy to find.
I will make sure all that is in the show notes so people can find you. Make it easier on them to find you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the chat.
All right, brother. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.
You wanna be a hero, said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumb us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Cause this world it needs a cleansing to burn away the shame and destroy Robin Hood. Our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood. Thank you.